in Zionsville, Indiana, and thank you for tuning into the 1 o'clock show of Zionsville News Network. Today, I'm your host, Lily Bass. Today is December 7th, 2021. 80 years ago today was, unfortunately, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. It's a reflection of World War II and one of America's biggest tragedies. Because of today's topic, I decided to cover the more so less discussed community of those affected by World War II, the LGBTQ community, hidden in the shadows of war, politics, and society. The big question today is how were LGBTQ Americans affected during World War II, and what were some of the after effects that impacted the 20th century? I interviewed 3 gentlemen to tell their stories about how they were affected during a time of unacceptance, Dr. Frank Kameny and a civilian couple, Dick Titus and Zeke Taylor. But before we get into their interviews, I'm going to talk about the backstory of LGBTQ history during World War II. Throughout the war, the military would search out for mentally ill soldiers. While they would be asking questions to determine if they were mentally ill, they would also be asked questions about their sexuality. There were mostly gay men that were caught and very few lesbians because women had just recently started to become part of the military, as well as meeting a need for female soldier proportions and quotas, so there weren't many policies that developed that were targeted towards lesbian concern until later on. Stereotypes also played a role in discrimination. Masculine women weren't considered to be lesbians, unlike how feminine men were considered to be gay. In fact, masculine women were encouraged because it showed that they would be considered more for military material. Although, the societal aspect started to shift towards women because of speculation around breaking heterosexual normativity in the WAC, the Women's Army Corps. This created the public to become concerned around women in the military and wanted to create a sense of normalcy to gender roles, as well as a fear of the military attracting sexually deviant women. So this increased homosexuality screening on women. Even though this discrimination was on the rise, the LGBT soldiers had seen new growth in a safe space for their community through things like drag shows, bars, and restaurants, and other places that were specifically for those of the same sex and attracted to the same sex. However, this was all very dangerous as well. If one did end up being a homosexual or even accused of one, would receive something called a blue discharge. The blue discharge was for releasing soldiers who were homosexual. Around 50,000 people received this discharge from the military. Joseph Patton is an example of a man who received a blue discharge in 1955. Although he didn't serve in World War II, he still experienced homophobia during the Lavender Scare, which we'll talk about later. He said that, quote, "They had military police walking around to check and see if there were any servicemen in any of these gay bars. When these 2 guys told the commanders they were lovers, everybody that were close friends with those guys was arrested, and I was kicked out of the service for being friends with a homosexual." New perceptions of gays and lesbians after World War II, which increased firing those who were homosexual, altered how they were recognized and viewed in American society, thus leading to post-World War II. The name Lavender Scare came from the Red Scare of communism from the 1920s. It probably wouldn't exist if it weren't for the post-communist concern after World War II. This name originated because gays and lesbians were assumed by politicians and the public to be affiliated with communism, and the lavender part originated commonly referring to gay men as lavender lads. This homophobia was mostly fueled by Senator McCarthy, who had a list of suspected communists overlapping with a list of suspected homosexuals, who McCarthy claimed sexual perverts have infiltrated our government in recent years and are perhaps as dangerous as the actual communists, end quote. McCarthy later on created Executive Order 10450. This prevented gays and lesbians from working under the government under any conditions. Although there were LGBT organizations that did help to deflect this order, such as the Mattachine Society. Because of the Lavender Scare, the Mattachine Society was originally founded as a secret organization by a man named Harry Hay. His goal of the society was to revolt against politicians silencing gays and lesbians. Not only this, but they would go to workers' rights and anti-racism protests. This was one of the first big LGBT organizations whose goals were to unify everyone and normalize homosexuality. Here, I'm sitting down with Dr. Frank Kameny, who unfortunately was a victim to this executive order. So tell me, Mr. Kameny, what was it like back then? Where does your story begin?
Well, it began after I returned home from fighting in World War II. I then graduated from Harvard, and then I received a PhD in astronomy, and I started working for the Army Map Service. Although a few months later, a few policemen caught me being affectionate in public with another man.
And what happened after that?
I unfortunately was fired afterwards because the police put it as part of my permanent record, and then my job found out.
What did you do in response?
I attempted to sue the government, which then went up to the Supreme Court, but I lost. However, in 1961, I helped co-founded the Mattachine Society, and I also helped found the GLAA, the Gay and Lesbians Activist Alliance.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kameny. It was truly an honor, and you're an inspiration to LGBT folks everywhere. And now, here I am sitting down with civilian couple Dick Titus and Zeke Taylor from Arkansas. So tell me, gentlemen, what is your story? What was it like back then?
Well, we've been together since 1975, and we decided to settle down into Fayetteville, Arkansas. I've always referred to myself as the invisible gay guy because people that I worked with didn't know I was gay and heard every single gay joke and slur. And, it hurt because these are people that I really liked. And in a small town like Fayetteville, everyone would know I was gay and nobody would hire me. So we had two houses because I needed a place so people could come after work and have a beer or two and hang out and such. And it's been hard living in America because of the impact of this homophobia.
Did you ever both feel ashamed of yourselves or of each other?
I feel like Dick was more ashamed of himself, but I felt like this was the price that we had to pay to be together.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate learning about your perspective from a civilian couple. Thank you for doing this with me today. It was an honor. Thanks to the LGBTQ community during World War II and afterwards, have created a domino effect that has helped create an impact on queer culture and civil rights. Other things that have progressively impacted the LGBTQ community in good and bad ways were moments such as the Stonewall riots in the 60s, the AIDS crisis in the 80s and 90s, up to the legalization of same-sex marriage in 2015. I hope that everyone here has gained new knowledge of the hidden LGBTQ history. I'm your host, Lily Bass, from Zionsville News Network.